Looking back on gaming innovations can be both interesting and depressing. In one cloud you see all the great and compelling ideas developers have implemented in their games, while in the other you see how some great concepts are never replicated. While there isn't a shortage of new ideas out there in the industry, more so in the indie scene, there is a shortage of titles that adopt certain innovations. Hello everyone, I am RedBeakRaven and welcome to a discussion video on the Nemesis system. In this video I'm just going to talk about the Nemesis system in general, ponder the question why has it not been ripped off, and look at some titles that could benefit from the same or similar system. Right, let's get into it. Actually, before I do, let me just moan at something that I should be happy about. I swear that every time I write a script on something, there comes some news about the thing I'm going to talk about, thus causing me to edit and add more to the script, which isn't a problem, it's just bloody annoying. Happened with my paid mods discussion, my discussion on early access, my video on the zombie theme, and now it's happened again with this discussion. Ken Levine recently talked about his game taking inspiration from the Nemesis system. Give me a bloody chance, would you? It's not my fault I had a hoarse voice for the past 2 weeks. Okay, so let's just get on with it. So the copying of, or as some like to put it, seeking inspiration from other titles is a pivotal part of the industry. Without it, our game libraries would be significantly smaller, which could be seen as a mixed blessing, but there are some fantastic knockoffs. After all, Pong is essentially table tennis, and where would we be without Grand Theft Auto to serve as inspiration? There'd probably be no Scarface The World Is Yours, great old game by the way, no Godfather games, no Saints Row or True Crime, now Sleeping Dogs game. I'm sure eventually we'd have gotten those, but they probably wouldn't be the same. Suffice it to say, ideas are ripped off all the time, and those that are successful tend to get nabbed pretty quickly. When Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor turned out to be a surprising success, it wasn't too optimistic to say that its highly praised Nemesis system would be the foundation of many future Nemesis-inspired systems to come. The only thing is, it wasn't and still isn't. Shadow of Mordor for the most part centered itself around the assassination and or interrogation of various orc bosses. These enemies were procedurally generated, and as we've seen in the past, procedural generation isn't something to get that excited about. However, Monolith took a very creative approach to this and came up with a system that could to an extent rival a predetermined scripted enemy. Depending on the circumstances, the commanders of the nameless Uruks you bulldoze through were fairly unique characters, who if encountered before could actually remember you and rise through the ranks of Sauron's army. Should a nameless Uruk strike you down in battle, they'll be given a name, title, new voice lines, and will remind you of their victory upon meeting them once again. It allowed the player to have a personalised storyline. The captains all had fairly unique personalities, though eventually the personalities were a bit repetitive, but there's only so many you can actually make. This made the encounters a lot more interesting, which was good because Shadow of Mordor is quite a repetitive game, though I'd say it's good repetition. That's something you don't hear very often. It was an excellent system that, had it not been executed in the way that it was, Shadow of Mordor could have very well been a much less entertaining experience. The game mostly consisted of that which is taken from many other titles, and that honestly did bring it down a little bit for me. Initially I wasn't a fan of it adopting parkour, and upon seeing the game had Ubisoft towers in it, I was worried it was just a generic action-adventure game Assassin's Creed ripoff. Its inspirations were mainly Assassin's Creed and the Batman Arkham games, but there were shades of others there as well. The Nemesis system was pretty much the only thing it had to call its own, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I thoroughly enjoyed Shadow of Mordor, more so because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan and will most likely buy any game just because it's set in Middle-earth. Naturally, because of this, I was hoping for it to be an enjoyable experience, and it did not fail to deliver. The combat was fun, the characters were fairly interesting, locations were average, nothing special there if I'm honest, the parkour was actually a good thing, and of course the Nemesis system was great. It was a game that acknowledged some of your actions, and that is exactly what I like and want to see in almost every adventure and or open world game I play, although at the end of the day I was just happy we got to see another game set in Middle-earth. More of those please. So for the time being, the Nemesis system remains Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor's, and now more recently Shadow of War's own little precious. A tool that hasn't been made outside of its own factory by someone else. And why is that? Surely some Ubisoft, EA or a company that actually wants to please its consumers has seen how well adopting this system in their games could go down. It's practically leaving money on the table for some. As soon as I got to experience the Nemesis system for myself, I was able to instantly see the potential for this in other series. In fact, the system could work in almost every open world game if the developers were willing to try it and it made sense. At the time, it was games such as Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed, Grand Theft Auto, The Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and a future Red Dead game that I thought would do well having a Nemesis system ripoff. Imagine if it was in Red Dead Redemption 2. People suggested other series such as Pokemon, Dark Souls, controls, you seriously want that game to be harder, and Far Cry, which are all very good suggestions. There's one title that could have benefited so much from a similar system. In fact, the series itself was another suggestion for this. It's no secret that Mafia 3 is a collage of repetition, with its racket bosses all following the exact same routine. Therefore, you the player were for the most part doing the same or similar things over and over again in order to take over New Bordeaux. Had the racket bosses individually been given more than an ounce of unique personality, Mafia 3 may have gotten a lot more compliments, but still, the racket missions themselves were virtually the same thing, though I still enjoyed the 30 or 40 hours I put into it. Fallout 4 could have also benefited heavily from a Nemesis system. It would have been a damn sight better than the Legendary system, that's for sure. The main argument, or rather potential reason for why this system isn't and or hasn't been ripped off, is that in Shadow of Mordor the Nemesis system made sense, whereas in other games it wouldn't, as they are anyways. Monolith's idea for the game's setting, story and protagonist was well tailored to the Nemesis system. Talion could not die, or at least stay dead. He is somewhat immortal. Shadow of Mordor spoilers here, by the way. So at the start of the game, Talion and his family are killed by the Black Hand of Sauron. He is then resurrected by a wraith known as Celebrimbor, who then merges with him, causing Talion to be neither dead or alive. This was a perfect setup for the Nemesis system, as dying wasn't a matter of reloading your save, but just respawning or essentially being revived. It also did something not many games do, and that is punishing the players for dying. The Uruks that killed you would become stronger, making fighting them once again a much more difficult task. Now of course, in games like Mafia 3, Fallout 4 and Assassin's Creed, your character does indeed die, and all we do is reload a save or restart from a checkpoint. Now it's not realistic to make every character in a game that adopts such a system undead for one reason or another, so how could you apply the Nemesis system to other games? Well, my first thought is why not scrap death? Replace it with being incapacitated, knocked out, wounded and dragged away somehow. Let's be honest here, dying in a lot of games is a futile thing. All we do is just reload and carry on as normal. So what if, in some games, our characters just never died? They were just rendered unconscious or wounded. You could implement the Nemesis system in a game for moments where players would retreat and come back later, but how many of us do that in something like Mafia 3? Like I said, we die, reload and then try again. Maybe that could work for an RPG, but I'm not really set on that idea. It would be an aspect that could potentially not be seen by many and probably wouldn't be worth the time spent putting it in. So if studios were to go down the route of essentially scrapping death, then how would that work to a point where it makes sense, looks alright and actually adds to the experience? Well, firstly, I'm a believer that not everything has to make sense, especially in a video game. At the end of the day, they are games, and if you want a really realistic experience, then there's plenty of simulators for that. Secondly, it's not actually difficult to make it look and feel fun. Think of the games where when you defeat a boss, they don't actually die, they are just stunned until you approach them, or a cutscene plays when you eliminate them, like in Assassin's Creed. They could do the exact same thing for the player. Let's say in Assassin's Creed, for example, there was a target you couldn't defeat, they or one of their allies struck you down. A cutscene could play of you running away from the fight holding your abdomen or something. You're in pain, you're wounded, you know, make it a bit realistic. And then you appear at your headquarters or hideout or wherever you rest your head. Your target now has better equipment, more bodyguards, and is unable to be assassinated in one fell swoop. And that's just tailored to Assassin's Creed. Obviously for other games it would all be different. But you see where I'm going with this. Actually make failure something to be a bit nervous about. Could even adopt the Far Cry 2 method where instead of dying you had friends who came and rescued you. There are plenty of creative and decent ways to make the Nemesis system fit well into other titles, but of course I could be wrong. It hasn't been done in anything else so far, but the only way to know whether it works or not is for devs to actually try it. Combining aspects from one game and another has given us some not so good titles, but it's also given us some fantastic ones. There are many combinations that have spawned some excellent products. Instances where I'm sure we've all said at one point, this should go with this. Sticking RPG aspects in an FPS game, for example, has spawned some brilliant things such as the Borderlands and Stalker series. There are just some rip-offs we want to see done. The Nemesis system is ripe for the taking, and it's been just over 2 years since Shadow of Mordor was released, so maybe, just maybe, there's a game out there that's been in development since then that steals it, twists it, paints it, and basically adopts it. Well, as I said earlier, there apparently is. Ken Levine, the talented developer behind the BioShock series and was also the lead designer and writer for System Shock 2, came onto the stage at EGX Res 2017 and stated that a lot of his inspiration for the next game of his came from Shadow of Mordor with the Nemesis system. He said that his new studio called Ghost Story is doing something more ambitious, and I've got to say, all I wanted was for more games to steal the Nemesis system and maybe improve it slightly, give it a new coat of paint, but if Ken wants to take it further, then that's brilliant, especially since we've already had a glimpse into a newer, improved system in Shadow of Mordor's sequel, Shadow of War. Not to be nitpicky, but does anyone else think that name's a little bit, I mean, the game's in Mordor, you could have just called it Shadow of Mordor too, but whatever. I'm glad we're getting a second game. It's not clear why or even if the Nemesis system hasn't been a source of inspiration for some other developers, but at least Ken Levine's comments let us know that the industry is aware of it and remembers it, plus with Shadow of War, the idea clearly isn't going away anytime soon. Shadow of Mordor's sequel, Middle-earth Shadow of War, was announced in late February and is stated to be out on the 22nd of August this year. If you haven't yet watched the 16-minute gameplay walkthrough and IGN's recently posted gameplay, then you really ought to do so when you get the chance, even if you've never played Shadow of Mordor. It looks fantastic. The way Monolith has expanded the Nemesis system is beyond anything I could have predicted, which is good because that is of course the game's main selling point. I'm optimistic for the sequel, but of course I'm not letting my excitement get the better of me. While it's important to try and manage hype and expectations, I cannot deny my excitement for the sequel. I am glad they doubled down on the Nemesis system in this, the friendships, the rivalries between your own soldiers, the betrayals, the more control you appear to have over the Uruks, the big ass battles, all of it sounds good. There's huge potential here that I hope they don't just mess up. Shadow of War is going to have very tough competition this year, but if the game is as good as it looks, I'm sure it will do well. For me, they've sweetened the pot with armies and regions to conquer. I love taking over coloured territories, painting the map essentially. It's a bit of an obsession. Plus, it's Middle-earth. We need more of those games. Anyone fancy a Middle-earth RPG? CD Projekt Red? Bethesda? Warner Brothers? Monolith? Anyone feel like making that a reality? I mean, I know Middle-earth Enterprises gave Warner Brothers the license to video games set in Middle-earth, but maybe you could extend that hand to someone else that's willing to, take the whole thing further. God, I miss the early 2000s. Not the being a child part, but the games that were coming out. Back then I actually liked EA games. The Lord of the Rings games they made were great. The Third Age, Battle for Middle-earth 1 and 2, pure gamer talking fan bliss. Anyways, that's enough from me in this video, now I hand the discussion over to you. Let me know in the comments below what are your thoughts on all this. Did you like Shadow of Mordor and the Nemesis system? Do you think it should transition to other franchises, and which ones? Also, what are your thoughts on Shadow of War so far? Ignoring the day one expansions, multiple editions, and the potential bloody microtransactions. Also, if anyone managed to get a Mithril edition, let me know what you actually think of it. Damn, that's expensive. I hope that statue is made of bronze. So hit the like button if you like this video. You can also follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook. Links to those find you will at the bottom of the description. Anyways, that's all from me. So until next time, I'll see you soon.